Thank you, Phyllis. I think I may have met Phyllis even in 2009, maybe. And if any of you will recall, 2009, 2010, there was something big going on in the country. And it was a group of people coming together because they were concerned about the debt, concerned that we weren't obeying the Constitution. And this group sort of became what was called the Tea Party movement. And I came out of that. When I first was just thinking about running for office, I was told that there was some kind of meeting happening on the square in Bowling Green. And I was coaching my little league team, my son's little league team. And I said, well, I'll just go down there for 20 minutes. You know how it is. 10 people will show up, and we'll protest, and that'll be that. And this was in the spring of 2009, and I showed up on the square in Bowling Green, and there were 800 people there. You guys had some of the same rallies up here, the Tea Party movement. Now, we haven't had as big rallies lately, but I think we've got every reason still to be motivated and to try to change things for the better, because the situation's only getting worse. I mean, under the previous Republican administration, the debt went from $5 trillion to $10 trillion. Under the Democrat administration, it's gone from $10 trillion to $20 trillion. But in some ways, we're kind of lulled to sleep. There was an article in Time magazine about a month ago by a guy named James Grant. And he said one of the reasons we're lulled to sleep is that the interest payment on $10 trillion, sounds like a lot of money, was $230 billion at the end of George Bush. Now we have a debt of $20 trillion, the interest is still only $230 billion. Why? They manipulate the interest rates. So the interest rates are half as much. We have twice as much debt, the interest rates are half as much. But we're now looking at 0% interest. Does anybody believe that that really makes any sense? The whole concept behind interest is, I have $1,000 and I give it to somebody to loan it out, but I'm not getting, I'm giving up the money for 6 months or a year, so someone has to pay me to give up the privilege of using my money now. That's what interest is. I didn't invent it, the government didn't invent it, but it's sort of necessary to the marketplace. And we had that terrible collapse in 2008 of the housing market. How did we get the boom? Federal Reserve set the interest rates below the market rate and we kept building. In a normal cycle, in a normal economic cycle, as people are building houses, if there's 10 home builders and then there's 20 and then there's 50, more people are bidding for the money, the price of the money rises. Interest rates rise and the economy does this. And this. Because you have this feedback loop. In medicine, we call it homeostasis. It's the maintenance of balance. So if I eat a meal, which I did about 20 minutes ago, my blood sugar's going up like this, and my insulin's going up, and if it works normally, it'll come back down. And you have this cycle. But it's this counter-cycle, this counter-cyclical nature that depends on prices. Not only the price of money, but the price of goods. People say, well, why does healthcare not work? Because there are no prices. The price is set by the government and or insurance companies, but largely the government with insurance companies following. So there's not a great marketplace. People say, well, how can we make healthcare accessible and cheap enough for everybody to get it? Get the government out of it. You know, the thing is in my practice, there were two things the government wasn't involved with, and neither was insurance. LASIK surgery and contact lenses. Price went down every year. Contact lenses, if you came to my practice, which they don't let me practice anymore, but I was within $1 of Walmart because I had to be. Competition works. But LASIK surgery, much more expensive, much more technologically advanced. The laser cost $1 million when it started. It's now down to $500 million. When LASIK surgery first started, it was about $2,000 an eye. Now it's about $250 an eye. Price came down because competition works. Competition means choice. It means freedom. So everybody's like, oh, what to do about healthcare? Why don't we do what we do with the rest of our economy? Make it open to competition. Allow patients more choices. Well, we kind of went the opposite way. We got Obamacare, and under Obamacare, they made it illegal to buy certain kinds of insurance, namely inexpensive insurance. So those of us who are left buying it are now paying more. Those who were given subsidized insurance go to the doctor and find out, oh yeah, I can go anytime, I've got my insurance card, but the deductible is $6,000, and so they're still finding that it's difficult to pay for. So we didn't address any of the cost of medicine, we addressed the access to medicine. But if you don't address the cost, and then the cost goes up, you really have meaningful access. It is still very, very expensive. What we have to do is think about what made our country great. Freedom, capitalism, limited government. The same principle should apply to our healthcare as well. Somebody came up to me when we were taking pictures, and she said, I loved it when you told Hillary she should be fired. And then you would have fired her during the committee hearing. That committee hearing keeps coming up. I've only had one chance to go toe-to-toe with her, And in that hearing, it was the Benghazi hearings, I said if I'd been commander-in-chief, I would have fired her. And I still believe that. It's the number one reason why she should not be commander-in-chief. It's not because she's dishonest, which she is. It's not because they have enriched themselves at your expense, because they have. But it's because she did not provide adequate security for people she put in harm's way. That's right. I see Lloyd Rogers, a good veteran here, and many others. It's the job of the commander-in-chief to provide adequate armaments and defense for our military when we put them in harm's way. Not only that, we ought to vote on it. I mean, the Constitution says Congress shall declare war. It doesn't say the President shall declare war. But when we had an ambassador in the middle of a war-torn area, I asked her the question, what were they doing there? Why was he in the middle of this war-torn area? Why did you take out the resources? These are still valid questions. Everybody got sort of sidetracked, I think, on the video and the spin and all the normal lying they do when they do something wrong. That's not really the point. For 6 months leading up to Benghazi, for the 6 months she kept bringing people home. Has anybody seen the movie 13 Hours? Yes. Those guys fought bravely all night long, just a few of them, holding off hundreds of people. And we have some brave people that will fight for us. But they took away the resources. So in the spring of 2012, before they were assassinated, there were 2 6-man special forces teams brought home. So that's 12. And then in August, there were 16-person security team left, headed by Colonel Wood. They were still in the country at that time. Colonel Wood was sending cables back to the State Department saying, we need to stay. The British embassy's been bombed. The British ambassador's been attacked. They're leaving the country. If we're going to stay, we have to have adequate security. Ambassador Stevens sent cables directly back to Hillary Clinton saying, we need to keep this remaining 16-person team. Colonel Wood has testified that he told them he needed to stay in the country. What did they do? They brought him home. So this is the kind of inexcusable behavior, is that you have to have a commander-in-chief that has wisdom. You have to have a commander-in-chief that has the best interest of protecting those we send abroad. She was too busy telling them they shouldn't wear their boots, their military boots, because they would offend the freedom fighters in Libya. They didn't want them to carry their weapons because, guns are bad. So they didn't want our soldiers to carry guns because that would offend the freedom fighters. The people protecting the ambassador were the February 17th Brigade. You know who that is? It's an offshoot of Al-Qaeda. They're radical Islamists who hate us. And that's who we had to protect. I don't think they were protecting Hillary Clinton when she flew around the world, but that's who she left to protect the ambassador. Inexcusable. And to my mind, it should forever preclude her from ever holding high office. When people say, what's the biggest problem we face, or what are the top 3 problems, I say it's the debt, and the debt. It really is. It is even what threatens our national security. As a country, you can become so overextended and have such little wealth left that you can't defend yourselves. That's what happened to the Roman Empire. They were everything to everyone, and they kept going further and further and further, and in the end, they collapsed of their own weight. We have to decide what's in our interest. The one way that you have a good decision-making process about when you go to war is obey the Constitution. Our founding fathers argued and argued and argued, and if you read any of their writings, they all said the same thing. No one person should take us to war. They didn't want a king. We did everything possible not to have a king, and the most important decision that any leader will ever make is on war. So they didn't give that power. In fact, Madison said that the executive branch is the branch most prone to war. Therefore, with studied care, we vested that power in the legislature. People say, oh, look, Congress is so messy, they can't ever do anything. There is a certain amount of gridlock, and our founding fathers understood that too. But you know what? When we've been attacked, we've been almost unanimous. Didn't take much of anything to get us to become unanimous. We disagree on everything, but after 9/11, when we voted to go into Afghanistan, almost everybody but I think one representative voted for it. I would have voted for it. I think it's a mistake to still be there 15 years later paving the roads and trying to make a country out of them, but I would have voted to go after bin Laden. I think we were right to go after bin Laden. But the thing is that we are united, and we've come together no matter what party we're in when we vote, when your Congress votes. After we were attacked at Pearl Harbor, unanimous the next day. But FDR didn't just declare war. Even FDR, who did so many reprehensible things of making government so large, he asked Congress for permission the way you're supposed to. Ask for permission. The reason you want us to debate, and you want it sometimes to be kind of messy, is there are pros and cons to war. When we're attacked, we all come together, and we're pretty unified. But what if we haven't been attacked and we're trying to say, what's the best way to pacify the Middle East? So maybe we should have had a debate over whether or not toppling Gaddafi was a good idea. The president came to our lunch one day, about the time that they were thinking about bombing in Syria, and I quoted back to him what he had said when he ran in 2007. He said basically what I believe and what the Constitution says. No president shall unilaterally go to war without the authority of Congress unless we're under imminent attack. We all understand there's an exception. I mean, if there are missiles being launched from a foreign country, the president has to have the ability to immediately defend the country. And I said, well, what about Libya? We weren't under imminent attack from Libya when you started bombing Libya. And he says, oh no, Benghazi was under imminent attack. And I said, well, you meant that any foreign city was under imminent attack, that the president would have the right to have unilateral war if a foreign city was under attack? He said, yeah. And it's like, more people, and then he said, oh, well, we did it because we were going to save lives. There was a chance that Gaddafi was going to go to Benghazi and there would have been a massacre. And I said, well, what happened after we went? And we talked to Gaddafi. It was a massacre. Tens of thousands of people died. And if you look at things objectively, you say, are we safer with Gaddafi gone or more at risk? I think we're more at risk. You know, the other day, we're now bombing Libya again. We're bombing strongholds of ISIS. ISIS controls a third of Libya. But ISIS didn't control any of Libya with Gaddafi there. Didn't make Gaddafi a good guy, but Gaddafi didn't like the Islamists either. He was Islamic, but he was not an Islamist. He was a dictator. Dictators don't like challenges, so they killed the radical jihadists. Same way Saddam Hussein did. Doesn't make him a good person, but we have to ask ourselves, are we better off with him going? Iran is stronger. Iran's a problem. Everybody talks about Iran being a problem, but we took away Iran's main enemy, which was Iraq. So the government now in Iran, or in Iraq, is aligned with Iran. Ultimately, we have to defend ourselves, or we should have a debate. When people say it's in our national interest, that's a conclusion. The discussion is it in our national interest? And there can be facts on both sides, and the facts can change over time. But we should have that debate. We should obey the Constitution. When we have to go to war, we should go all in to win. We shouldn't tie one hand behind our back, and we shouldn't mess around. One of the biggest problems we face, and if I were to sum up, all of the problems, what's the worst thing President Obama's done? And I would have to ask you how long you have to listen. But if we were to sum it all up, and we weren't going to talk about Obamacare, which is bad, or the banking regulations, Dodd-Frank and all that, which are bad as well, but if we were just to sum it up, I'd say what he's doing to the country is the collapse of the separation of powers. Our founding fathers, I can't go on enough at how smart they were, how they studied history, how they studied what hadn't worked in the past, how when Ben Franklin comes out of the Constitutional Convention, a woman says, is it a democracy? Is it a monarchy? And he says it's a republic, if you can keep it. The failure has always been when people vote, eventually they start voting, and then eventually we're out of other people's money, as Margaret Thatcher said. But the idea of a republic was that it wasn't a pure democracy, that 51% of the people could not vote to take away your right to practice your religion, that 51% of the people couldn't take away your right to bear arms, that these things were natural, God-given rights, and the purpose of the Constitution was not to restrain you, it was to restrain your government and to protect your natural God-given rights. We've gotten away from that. But we've also gotten so far away from the checks and balances that we no longer have equal branches of government. Congress is supposed to be equal to the presidency. If I were to estimate the difference in power now, I would say the president is 1,000-fold more powerful than Congress. Some of it's because Congress hasn't done their job. They haven't stepped up and used the power of the purse. But some of it's because the president has grabbed power. And not just this president. It's, I'm fairly bipartisan in my critique of what's going on. Many Republican presidents have grabbed up power. We need to understand that power is a corrupting influence. And that part of the job of the founders and ours, each generation, is to try to limit the accumulation of power. Lincoln put it this way. Lincoln said that any man can stand adversity, but if you really want to test a man, give him power. Washington passed that test. Washington could have been king for life, but he gave it up after 2 terms. The test of someone is someone who will actually give power back and not try to accumulate more. But so much power is accumulated in the presidency and as a consequence, the regulatory agencies, they're under the executive branch, then most of the laws are not being written by Congress. Most of the terrible things that President Obama's doing, he's done by edict. He's done by regulatory edict. What he has done on immigration, agree, disagree, or have a variety of opinions on immigration, you can't have one person write the law. He's written a law that says millions of people are no longer subject to the immigration law. We now have cities that say, oh, well, we don't care about the federal law. We're going to release dangerous people into the public like they did in San Francisco. That shouldn't happen. You should not have people above the law. You shouldn't have it where our corporal at Fort Campbell is treated one way and Hillary Clinton is treated another way for misusing or misapplying classified information. The law needs to be equally applied to everyone. But we now have regulatory branches that are writing the laws. Obamacare was 2,000 pages, but the regulations were written on it 20,000 pages. Obamacare says that in 180 times the Secretary of Health shall decide at a later date. We're giving up too much power. We now have a board, and people involved with banking will have heard of this, the Consumer Financial Protection Board. It doesn't get any appropriations from Congress. So we couldn't even use the power of the purse if we were inclined to remove their funding. It is even debatable whether the guy that's in charge of it has a term of office. We appointed him, but some are saying that he has no term, that he can serve as long as he wishes. When he came before Congress and we asked him about $700 billion he spent, improvements, would you like to have $700 million in improvements in your house? $700 billion improvements on the building, he kind of shrugged it off and said it was none of our business to ask those questions. This is the kind of thing that we're getting. The VA, when the VA came and said, oh, these waiting lists, there's no waiting lists in Arizona, and they were lying to us, we said, well, they should be fired. And you know what they told us? You can't fire us, we're federal employees. This is the insulting nature of government, that even when people commit malfeasance, you cannot fire them. We found this out when we investigated, during the shutdown, they sent a notice around to all the different offices, and they said, list your essential and your unessential employees. I said, well, this is great. We'll learn what parts of government are essential and unessential. So I said, ask the EPA, ask the IRS. The IRS said 90% unessential during the shutdown. It means they didn't have to show up for work. EPA, 95% unessential, don't have to show up for work in a shutdown. And I thought, wow, we're really going to learn something here. And then I discovered, my staff discovered this, they don't have to come to work, but they still get paid. So if we have an impasse and government shuts down, the federal employees all get paid whether they come in. In fact, they'd rather be unessential because they don't have to show up and get paid. But when they're investigating this, they found some guy at the EPA downloading porn 6 hours a day on his government computer. They couldn't fire him. They found a woman selling jewelry and vitamins, had her own cottage industry business on her government computer. Couldn't fire him. They investigated some federal employees in Pittsburgh, and they somehow could, because they were government employees and had a government computer, they could tell how many times they edited Wikipedia. It was like 1,500 times. One guy had edited the Wikipedia entry for Lurch. You remember Lurch from the Addams Family? He had edited it 17 times. I guess he was very concerned about Lurch's profile. These are federal employees, and then you can't fire them. So we changed the law and said you can fire the VA employees. The director came back and he said, well, we fired one person. As if there were only one person involved in this. And he said, but really we're concerned about this. We're concerned that we won't get enough applicants to fill our position if we tell them they could possibly be fired. And it's like, join the rest of us in America. You have to do your job or you will be fired. So we have a great deal of problem. We're borrowing $1 billion a minute. We have a $20 trillion debt. And we put out a waste report. Some of you probably get the email from me. I send out an email every week telling you where some of it's being wasted. It is amazing. It's appalling. It should make you angry. And it should make you send emails to your legislators saying, cut the spending. Because we're not doing a good enough job controlling the purse. But the money just goes hand over fist. My good friend Thomas Massey, I'll steal his since he's not here, he talks about the poppy, all the crop being grown in Afghanistan. They had the best crop ever last year. We spent $8 billion eradicating it. So Thomas's idea is, look, I can buy a lot of Roundup. With $8 billion, I think I can do a better job. But we spent $1.2 million developing a cartoon character to try to convince them not to grow poppy. Well, we can make $1 a day doing real work, or $20 a day, or $100 a day selling drugs. I don't think cartoon characters are necessarily going to do it. We have another program, we spent $1 million on a variety program for Afghanistan to teach them English, but it's performed in Dari, their language. We spent $45 million in Afghanistan on a natural gas station. First problem, none of their cars run on natural gas. Second problem, only about 1 in 1,000 people over there have a car. Nobody in America's got one. If we had a natural gas station in Florida, who would use it? No one's got a natural gas car. But we made the military's mission not to defend us, not to kill the enemy, but to promote climate change theology. So this natural gas station is in Afghanistan because we're reducing our carbon footprint in Afghanistan. What business of that is our national defense to have anything to do with carbon footprint in Afghanistan? We've spent $100 billion, over $100 billion on infrastructure in Afghanistan, on their roads, their bridges, their schools, you name it. Then they blow them up and then we build them again. We spent $15 billion in Pakistan. These people don't like us. None of them like us. We can't make them like us, but we certainly shouldn't pay them to hate us. In Pakistan and in Afghanistan, where we won the war, their constitution says that if you convert to Christianity, you will get the death penalty. If you marry a Christian, you can get the death penalty. If you criticize the state religion, you can get the death penalty. There's a woman by the name of Asia Bibi who's been on death row for 5 years in Pakistan. Her crime, she went to the well in a small village to draw water. As she was drawing water, they were stoning her and beating her with sticks, the women of the village. She fell to her knees, fell to the ground bleeding, and she thought she was going to die. She was calling out for the police. The police finally arrived, and she thought she'd been saved, only to be arrested. The women of the village said that she had criticized the state religion, which is Islam. It's against the law to say anything critical. But the problem is it's gossip, and it's people who don't like you because you're a Christian, and they're all of another religion, so they just tell the authorities, yep, she said something about Islam. And then there she is on death row. It's your word against the rest of the women in the village. So, at the very least, should we at least quit funding these people? I introduced an amendment in the Foreign Relations Committee to say no more money, no more foreign aid, no more of your U.S. tax dollars should go to any country that persecutes Christians. Yeah. And you know what the vote was? 18-2 against me. Most of the Republicans and most of the Democrats voted to continue sending the aid. They said we have to. How could they'll think we're at war with them if we don't give them money? And we're giving it to the moderates over there. We're influencing their behavior in a moderate way by giving them money. And it's like, well, why don't we try the opposite? It doesn't seem to be working. Why don't we try withholding money until they behave? Instead of giving them money and hoping they behave, let's withhold it till we see them do something. They're not going to change their constitution. They're not going to quit persecuting Christians. It's in the nature of what they believe. So we should just quit funding them. We don't have any money. It's not like we have all this surplus sitting around and we're just going to pass out some money. We've got to borrow it from China to send it to Pakistan. I blocked the sale of airplanes for about a week, as long as I could hold it. And then I forced a vote in the Senate. They weren't happy with me, but I forced them to vote on whether or not we should buy F-16s for Pakistan. One reason I'm worried about it is, at any week or any time in the near future, what happens if the so-called moderate government fails and the jihadists take over Pakistan? Then they've got nuclear weapons and our F-16s. We should be very judicious with who we sell our weapons to, because you've paid for those weapons. Even though a private company makes them, we paid for the technology. Those weapons exist. The F-16, the Abrams tank, and all these weapons exist because we paid for them for our national defense. They're not just like a private company that should be able to sell their weapons anywhere. We should look very long and hard at who gets our weapons, because we fund both sides of an arms race in the Middle East. We gave anti-tank weapons to a group in Syria who then spouted off, the leader of this spouted off on TV and said, when we're done with Assad, we're going to go after Israel. So we gave weapons to somebody who's telling us to our face, we're going to attack your ally when we're done with Assad. And they don't even want to attack ISIS. They like ISIS, half of them. They hate Assad. But it's more of a political battle and a little bit of a religious battle because he's more aligned with the Shiites and they're Sunni. But they don't have any love lost for us. Many of the people who have been funded on that side, I think, are either ISIS or Al-Qaeda or related, or even the ones who aren't, still hate us. And so that's why I asked Hillary Clinton in that hearing, I said, did you or were you aware of any knowledge of arms shipments going from Benghazi, from the CIA annex, aware of any shipments going through Turkey into Syria. It's been in the newspapers, been in the London Times, New York Times, been in the Washington Times. She said, "Oh, Senator, Turkey? I've never heard of such a thing. I have no," and then I asked her again, and she said, "I have no knowledge of that. It's an out-and-out, bold-faced lie, and not her first. But some of the hacking of all these emails, there's somebody now promising that there's going to be an email coming out that's going to specifically contradict her on that. And I'm pretty sure she was lying, even from the information I've gotten in hearings. But just from reported episodes, I'm pretty sure that that whole program was going on. And they were trying to get and see, this was another consequence of knocking off Gaddafi. They have surface-to-air missiles, which are very dangerous. You can bring down an airliner landed in northern Kentucky with a surface-to-air missile. Those all got into the hands of all the jihadists when Gaddafi was toppled. He had them. Once again, he's not a good guy, but worse people got him when we knocked off Gaddafi. So we've got a lot of problems. The bottom line is you got the presidential election coming up, you got my election coming up. Clinton is terrible for Kentucky. She'll be awful for Kentucky, awful for the country. Whoever wins is going to afford a Supreme Court justice. Now, those of you who watched the debate, you saw I had some differences with Donald Trump. But when I compare Trump to Clinton, there's no comparison. And Trump has come out and said who he would appoint to the Supreme Court. He put forward about 10 or 11 justices. Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative think tank, likes them. Federalist Society, which is a conservative attorneys association. Compare that to what we'll get. We'll get more Ruth Bader Ginsburgs from Clinton. So I think the choice is clear. I also need your help. I appreciate many of you I've known and seen from the very beginning of the Tea Party movement. I appreciate all of your support. Don't take this election for granted. I'm a very wealthy opponent. He's already put in $1 million. There's a chance he dumps in a few more million in the fall. We have to be prepared for that. Northern Kentucky is our last stand. You guys helped overwhelm the areas of the state that aren't as Republican. You are very Republican, but what we need is about a 70% turnout up here, not a 50% turnout. That makes a difference. It makes a big difference. You met some of the House candidates, new and current House candidates. We have a chance of flipping the state House too, but everybody's got to get out and vote. Kentucky will be a good place to do business. Thanks again for coming out. We're working hard. We've done 80 town halls so far in the first 6 or 7 months of the year. So we're traveling, we're doing a lot of work, taking nothing for granted, but I also need your help, and I hope you'll continue. Thank you very much.